honored to be here a third time. Did everybody get a copy pen? Okay.
Think the later arrivals might not have it.
Yeah,
We'll
there
take
we
care
go.
of it.
I'm gonna put my timer on because I love to talk about Camp Forrest and I'll keep y'all here till midnight, so I gotta watch myself. So I do appreciate giving me the opportunity to come back to y'all and talk about prisoners of war at Camp Forrest during World War II. And are you gonna be my?
I am. You ready?
Thank you, yes. I'm gonna
Assuming
take-
it goes. It may be a little bit behind.
That's okay.
Computer's being slow tonight.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I've been researching Camp Forrest for over 15 years, and I still find that there are numerous important elements of this World War II base that are still yet to be discovered. I don't have any military connections, no connection to the state of Tennessee. I just learned about Camp Forrest from a colleague of mine when I did university administration. And I have discovered so much that it has continued to fascinate me over time. And to my surprise, a lot of this information is not widely known. I'll let you go to the next one. So, these are the two books that I've published, and I'm working on a third, which will be out next fall. We started to curate museum exhibits. We have one at the Tullahoma Fine Arts Center. I also work with an individual at the Tennessee National Guard Training Building. And that building sits on about 18 acres where individuals from local to federal personnel come to train. And so we want them to understand the ground in which they're training. And we've developed a number of traveling exhibits, especially on POWs. And so I hope to work with a number of organizations so we can develop museum tour stops. So everywhere you look, you're going to find a little bit of history. And like I said, with each publication, each exhibit, I hope that individuals begin to understand how POWs got to Camp Forrest, what their lives were like, how they impacted the civilians that were here during World War II. And I want to help my audiences that I talk to understand the facets of World War II. It's way more than what we learn in a textbook, we see in documentaries. So for today's lecture, I'm going to start out and tell you a little bit about Camp Forrest, but we'll spend the bulk of our time together talking about POWs. Now, the way I like to do lectures is if you have questions, don't wait to the end. Holler out at me, raise your hand, shout it out, because I like to learn from y'all as much as I hope you're going to learn from me, and learning together is the best way. So, just a brief background. Camp Forrest was a World War II military base about a mile from Tullahoma. It was on 80,000 acres, and it was an expansion of a Tennessee National Guard facility, Camp P. They had over 250 soldiers who got their initial physical exams for the induction process. 70,000 soldiers trained there on the base proper. It employed over 12,000 civilians. We had civilian internees. And for the POWs, over 60,000 were processed, but at the height of housing POWs, there were over 20,000 detained there. Camp Forrest also was the logistics hub for the Tennessee maneuvers, which were the simulated war game exercises that took place throughout Middle Tennessee from 41 to 45. So throughout this area, there's from 1940 to 46 a massive number of people in and around Camp Forrest, in and around that Middle Tennessee area. I'll let you hit for the next one. So construction started late 1940, and it was anticipated to cost about $36 million. That equates to roughly around $800 million in today's dollars, if you could even build it for that. There was over 1,300 buildings, 55 miles of roads, 5 miles of railroad tracks. And by summer of 41, even before December 7th, we had troops from the 33rd Division coming from Chicago, Illinois, to start their training at Camp Forrest. It was one of the largest World War II training and induction facilities in the U.S. It was literally a self-sustaining city, serving as training grounds for infantry, artillery, armor, engineering, signal units. And I'd love for y'all, if you ever get the time, to come and see the old grounds. But they have maintained the old ground. It's called Wattendorf Highway. So if you get off Interstate 24 and you're going toward Tullahoma, you're able to put yourself back in time. As you look on either side of that road, you see the old Camp Forrest roads. There's dirt berms, so you won't drive off into the wild blue yonder, but you can see, you can put yourself back in time there. The Tennessee National Guard uses about 18,000 acres, and Arnold Engineering uses about 20,000 with their goal of testing jet propulsion engines and things like that. So the rest of the original footprint is pretty much a time capsule. You can see tank tracks, jeep tracks, and see the slit trenches and the earthworks where they were training, where they were learning to fight to take on the enemy once they got in the European theater. I'll let you get to the next one.
There we go.
So this is a blueprint of Camp Forrest. You can see how large it is. And in addition to Camp Forrest, there was a Army airfield. I'll let you go one more. And it was William Northern Army Airfield. It's about 1.5 miles from Camp Forrest, and it served as advanced flight training for B-24 bombers, observation plane pilots, paratroopers, and it was the state's 3rd largest airfield during that World War II era. Next one. And so now here we get to the interesting part, talking about the POWs. There were about 425,000 POWs that were brought to the U.S. via Liberty ships. Now, one of the things that individuals don't realize is that the nationalities of these individuals varied greatly. We had people from Czechoslovakia, Poland, Germany, Italy, East Africa, and other European, Eastern European nations. More oftentimes than not, individuals who were fighting for Germany were given the option to either wear the uniform or be killed or have their family killed. And so when you're faced with those alternatives, you can see why they had so many in the German army. Now, in the POW camps, we did find that there were a lot of ardent Nazis in there, and they tried to cull those out as quickly as they could. But there were far more individuals who didn't want to fight, who were glad and happy to be POWs. There's accounts where those wearing the German uniform, German soldiers, would run to American and British troops when they saw them so that they could immediately surrender, because they didn't want to be doing this. They were under duress that they had to do it in the first place. Did you hit the next one? So there were over 700 encampments located throughout the U.S. They were typically in warmer climates, and that was because we were under the impression that individuals from Germany and coming from North Africa, they would not tolerate the cold that we would find up north. So that's why you find a preponderance of POW facilities in the south. Now, the German prisoners were members of the Wehrmacht, which was Germany's unified armed forces from 35 to 45. And many of Camp Forrest POWs were captured when General von Arnim surrendered to U.S. and British forces. So he and his 150,000 Africa Corps soldiers were detained at collection points throughout North Africa until those Liberty ships were available to take them back to the U.S. On a 2-week journey. Now, particularly at Camp Forrest, the commander of the POW facility was Colonel Russell Wolfe, and he had gotten orders to send several of his MPs, and this was in late spring of '43, to North Africa on those Liberty ships taking soldiers over with the express purpose of bringing POWs back. They already had names and lists of POWs and where they would most likely go to be stationed and detained. At the point of embarkation in the U.S., they were put on trains. The trains had the windows blackened out to disorient them, with the thought that that would help deter escape attempts, because they didn't know where they were going. So the first prisoners to arrive at Camp Forrest were 1,500 Germans in June of '43. But by '46, there were over 20,000 POWs. Now, primarily they were German and Italian prisoners that were being transported from Europe. And all of those little tiny dots there, those are all people in one little confined area. And then these are having them march down to board ships. Let's do the next one. So I want to take a quick moment to go over a definition. So in World War II, prisoner of war, these people were members of an armed forces who were captured by opposing sides during combat. The rights and treatments of POWs were outlined in the 1929 Geneva Convention. Now, we had some countries that loosely interpreted this doctrine, and some that, like the U.S., adhered to it very strictly. We had Britain telling us, quit treating them so well. Everybody know, all the POWs know how well you're treating them. Stop it. But the U.S., under the thought that if we treat their prisoners well, they're going to treat our soldiers well. But we found that that wasn't necessarily the case. There was no level of reciprocity that we had anticipated. Did you go to the next one? So the word prisoner can be misleading in the word POW, prisoners of war, because individuals were not prosecuted for participating in war, and their detainment was not a form of punishment. Their detainment was simply to prevent them from further participating in the war. And so we did get some of the POWs from Britain as soon as, December 8th. Churchill was over here making plans for those that were overloading the Britain's resources to come here in the U.S. Next one. Now, this is the blueprint for the POW section at Camp Forrest. So these are the double wire fences, but you had hutments and you had barracks through there. But there were open field sections, like right in here, where they used to grow gardens, orchards, and things like that. So to a certain degree, they grew their own food. Now, some of the POWs were processed to other facilities. Some were permanently stationed, like at Camp Forrest. And again, they were making those efforts to weed out those hardcore, so that little of life for the POWs were disrupted. They could just go around day-to-day activities. And those ardent POW Nazis were sent to Camp Alva. So throughout the U.S., all of the soldiers that adhered to that Nazi philosophy were all sent to the middle of Oklahoma. And so there were 11 camps throughout Tennessee. 4 of them were permanent. We had Camp Forrest, Camp Crossville, which was often referred to as the Jap camp, even though we did not have any Japanese POWs. They were strictly German and Italian. Camp Campbell, and then in Memphis, Armed Services Forces Depot. Satellite camps as far as here in Huntsville, Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, Jackson, Tennessee, Sail Creek, Tellico Plains. Camp Forrest also sent POWs to harvest and do other work projects in Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. I recently found out from Colonel Wolf's family the reason why so many POWs were sent to South Carolina is that was where he was from. So the big influxes that you saw in the temporary camps were where he knew that farmers needed labor. So he made sure that those in his home state were taken care of to a certain degree. Let you go to the next one. Now there were not a lot of translators at the camp, but guards and POWs were able to overcome language barriers with Germans learning English and U.S. soldiers learning German. And to a degree, these are copies of little sketches that Colonel Wolf had made so that soldiers could have some basic German words to try to communicate with people. POWs were given the opportunity to learn and improve language skills with courses. Initially, they were correspondence courses, and then they had professors from universities actually come and teach classes. So they could take a variety of college level classes, and some actually obtained degrees before returning home. Now, with educating POWs, the U.S.'s end goal was that they wanted to imbue them with the respect for the quality and potency of American institutions. The thought was, if we educate these POWs, when they return home, they're going to educate, and so this American philosophy, American teachings are going to gradually go out throughout. Yes?
Doctor, after the war was over and they got paroled, were any of them allowed to stay in that area?
It depends on who you talk to. The federal government says not one person stayed. A lot of civilians say, yeah, they were here, they didn't go home. And a lot went home, but did the paperwork to come back and be citizens. So you do see a large German populations throughout. Let's do the next one. This is an actual certificate of achievement for a POW at Camp Forrest for completing American history. So the other thing that the federal government eventually instituted was the intellectual diversion program. And so this was the U.S. government's attempt to further influence Germans with American culture, and that its peoples need to be appreciated and respected. Now, initially, the attempts to gain compliance with POWs to take these courses, it was not subversive. So both saw it as an opportunity to better themselves. American officers helped POWs attain educational and recreational materials. You see a lot of the letters where they're writing off and requesting books, art books, education books. And as time passed, POWs started a camp newspaper, took more and more correspondence courses, history, geography, English, were some of the routine courses available. Let you go to the next one. Recreation time, music. Those that made enough money or had enough money at their disposal could buy radios. Some produced plays, the newsletters, playing sports, creating paintings and drawings. Some used materials that were readily available. tin cans. The YMCA and the Red Cross would provide materials as well to these individuals to keep them busy. A lot of the individuals who worked or visited Camp Forrest have recalled stories, either themselves or relatives, where there weren't many unpleasant encounters. One person told me where midday every day they could hear Italian operas being sung and echoing throughout the camp. Now, in addition to recreation, they could actually work. Assignments were based on individual skill sets and interest. Some jobs were at the station hospital. There was the American Soldier Hospital at Camp Forrest, but they also built a hospital specifically for POWs. And it was one of the few big major hospitals that POWs were sent to. So an individual who wanted to learn medical skills and take those skills home could start learning that here. A lot went to harvesting crops because the male population was overseas fighting. So you had to have somebody to get those crops coming in. And so they did all types of farming. One of the other things that they had POWs do was the camouflage weaving project. And initially, POWs pushed back because the POWs understood all of the conventions of the 29 Geneva Convention. And so they knew what they could and couldn't do and what they could and couldn't get away with. And so sometimes they pushed the envelope just like a kid, see what they could get away with. And so they said, no, we can't do this. Camouflage nets are used in war. You can't use us to make war production products. But the U.S. found a loophole and said, nope, these are used for training. So the camouflage weaving project, at its height, produced over 100 square feet a day. There were about 6,000 POWs working on the project. Now, were all of them used for training or sent overseas? I wasn't there. Crops were tobacco, cotton, peanuts. Even amid the language barriers, farmers were able to teach POWs how to cut the tobacco stems and so forth. A lot of them said they went through a lot of knives because they had to learn on the job, and they broke a lot of the equipment, but eventually they did learn how to do that. The level of cooperation varied considerably. Some wanted to work, but you had those, just like in any society, they were arrogant, lazy, uncooperative. But most wanted to work just to alleviate boredom, but they were also paid. Non-commissioned POWs earned 80 cents a day, and that was outlined in the Geneva Convention, where it stipulated wages be based on prevailing rates for U.S. enlisted personnel. So a farmer or someone who needed the labor, they had to pay $1.50 a day to have a POW come help them. So the POW at the end of the day got the 80 cents, but the rest of that money was used to defray the costs of food and housing. So they weren't as much a drain on our system as they were in Britain and some of the other countries. One newspaper had reported, and I found this statistic just amazing. It reported that for civilian labor, the Army would have incurred an additional $3.52 per man per day to complete similar tasks that the POWs were completing. So we were getting decent labor at cheap cost. Now, POWs could keep their money and take it with them at the end of the war, or they could buy little chits, little coupons, and they could go to the PX or the canteen and buy stuff. They could get candy and ice cream and Coke and beer, toiletries, whatever they want. Now, to some degree, that irked citizens because they couldn't get these things. But it was said, we have to do this. This is part of the Geneva Convention. This is what we're doing. A funny story that I heard is you could only buy one bottle of 3-2 beer a day. So some ingenious POWs said, okay, we're each gonna buy a beer a day. You get all the beers this day, you get all the beers that day. So each person got 6 beers and got a good buzz. So they rotated around every day of the week. I don't know how long that was allowed to last, but just one of the little funny ways they got around some of the rules. The Provost Marshal General's office helped ensure each prisoner received his remaining earnings when he did depart for the U.S. I'll let you go to the next one. Hurry. Even given the language barriers and that you had so many people crammed in a small space, there weren't many disruptions and there were few escape attempts. Escapees were generally caught within a few days, and some of the POWs that escaped ended up coming back just saying, it's too much trouble. I'm in the middle of nowhere and it's cold. This is an actual wanted poster, so we had fingerprints and photographs, and those were things that were done as the POW actually came into each port when they got to the U.S. So these types of things followed them as they went from camp to camp. This map is actually a map that Camp Forrest officers confiscated. It was a POW planning escape attempt. I don't think he realized the vast distance from one side to the other. He thought there's a little dot in the middle of Tennessee. He was thinking that's about where he was. Let me go to the next one. They lived in either hutments or barracks. The hutments were wooden, one story, about a 16 by 16 building, tar paper covered. On the inside, the hutments had a large single room on a concrete slab. There was a wood burning stove that was vented out through the roof to give them warmth in the winter. And then there were windows that could be opened to the outside to get the cool air to circulate on the inside. The next one. Now, they had a lot of time on their hands. I think this is one of the more elaborate ones, but this is the inside of a hutment. So they could decorate it as they saw fit. Some were modest. On the outside, you had rocks and flower gardens. Typically, there were 5 prisoners that would fit within that one hutment. So you had to have personalities that were a little bit cohesive. Otherwise, you got crankiness. And Colonel Wolfe did tell his son that there were a number of little grumbles where POW didn't like this one, and they all ganged up and said, you got to get him out here. Got him here. He's lazy. I don't like him. Eventually, they let them self-govern themselves, and so they let them work it out. They said that the hutments were usually poorly insulated. Rains caused the grounds to be muddy, but overall, the POWs were treated very fairly, except for occasional diet restrictions or what would be, to me, just horrible treatment, the loss of hot water to gain compliance if they got too far out of line. They had access to medical and dental facilities as well. I'll let you do the next one. They were able to write home. They received mail from Germany or Italy. What that I find is interesting about this, they had specific postcards and specific stationery that they had to use. And that was so that postal censors could see if there were any coded or hidden messages or any invisible ink that was being used to send messages back to Germany. But typically the postcards that I've had translated, they're just happy to hear from their loved ones, hear that they're doing fairly well. They report that they're doing well and they've actually gained weight because they have ready access to food. The censors were on both sides, so you had U.S. censors. Typically, you'll see that they all go through one place, typically New York, and that's where they actually took the time. They read through. They actually had a government form they had to fill out, saying what the letter said, where it went to, who it went to, as well. And then once it got to Germany, the same process on the German side to make sure that there was no hidden communications. Once these people went home, they continued their letter writing to people in Tennessee that they had made friends with. Long into the 60s and 70s, these people stayed in touch, detailing fond memories of the times when they were there. Wives would cook for the POWs, letting them understand biscuits and gravy and things they had never been exposed to. I look at it as it was a time of war and death and destruction, but more often than not, people chose humanity and compassion toward those enemies of the state to learn and grow. And again, most of the time, the relationships were friendly and harmonious. There were some that ended in death. Let's do one more. Given the sheer number of people, I've only been able to find that 87 POWs died at Camp Forrest. 73 of them from natural causes, 4 in accidents, 1 attempting to escape, 1 attacked a guard, and then you had suicides as well. There were 30 escape attempts, but from those, only 1 was killed, the others recaptured, or, like I said, just decided it wasn't worth it. There's a story of a POW that fell in love with country music. And when he learned how close he was to Nashville and the Grand Ole Opry, he devised the plan that he got some civilian clothes, put them on, walked out of gate 1 like he knew what he was doing, walked into Tullahoma, bought his bus ticket, made it to Nashville, enjoyed the show at the Grand Ole Opry, and when it was over, he just went to the police station to get a ride back to camp. So, newspapers at the time said farmers requested that the federal government delay sending POWs back because they needed the help with harvesting. And to a certain degree, they did delay it, but only by a few months, because you get into the whole kit and caboodle of, labor issues and things like that, holding people after the war is ended. I talked with someone who had worked during in the finance department, and so she kept those little cards and she kept up with how much each person made, so that by the time they left, they had an accurate count of what they had earned. But one young man was just so distraught about having to return to Germany that he hung himself. But everybody else I've talked to have recounted that experiences. POWs were polite, they were nice. Rarely did you have aggressive, unnecessary behavior. Let's do that.
I about hit the wrong button.
There you go. Now, one of the things that I do when I do talking about POWs to kind of bring it back into humanizing it is I focus on the art that was created. Never in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought that I would have become a collector of such a niche thing, World War II POW art. But it gives us a glimpse into the lives of people during a specific time, a specific place. Some POWs created works of art as a means for exchange. I'll paint this painting for you for a carton of cigarettes. Some did it because they were just bored. Some did it because they were just homesick. But however or whyever they did it, we don't know, but we do have the artifacts that are left that we can see. For me, this shows details of pre-war life the individuals led and what they were looking to return to someday. So I like to say that we can connect with and learn more about World War II history creatively rather than those boring facts and figures and sometimes the erroneous stuff we learn in documentaries. And so these are a few of the carvings that we have. This was actually a cigarette case. The top flips to close it. Our cigarettes have filters. They didn't have filters at the time, so they laid flat. A little horse. That is a nameplate that a POW carved for Colonel Wolfe, the POW commander. Let's do the next one.
You tell me. There we go.
These are a few paintings, scenes from home, from their memory. Scenes, some of them from what they saw in the camp that they were being held. There's a few POW drawings and paintings back there that you can see. This one is amazing. Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
It's a piece of bark. So it's just from a pine tree. And so we painted a scene on the top of it. And so it's just still a slice of wood. Just the debris to which they used anything they could find. Let's do the next one. And I think these are drawings. This is the POW newsletter. So it had poems, drawings, sports information. Let's do the next one. Metalworks. These were actually tools that a POW had made to do his crafts. They were also considered a weapon, so they were confiscated. POWs didn't have access to a full range of carving tools. The most that they could have is a straight razor, what they would use to shave with every day. They could get extra and use that for their art projects. But metalworks, jewelry. The middle one at the top was an actual working lighter that a POW made. And then that's pretty much all I have for y'all today. Just some scenes, training in and around Camp Forrest. I hope you find the information valuable, informative, insightful, and again, I appreciate you letting me come here today.